Welcome back to the Motherly Shift podcast. I'm Kemichele, and I am very excited to introduce to you today two amazing people who have joined this discussion today to talk about how our history impacts the African American mother-daughter dynamic. With us today is Cherie White, who is an independently licensed therapist with over 20 years of experience in the field of mental health. Holding a master's degree in counseling from Cleveland State University, she has worked extensively with individuals, couples, and families across a spectrum of challenges, including anxiety, depression, PTSD, family conflict, and work-related stress. With a client-centered, strength-based approach, Cherie is dedicated to helping people restore balance and harmony in their lives. Her practice is rooted in creating collaborative, empowering spaces where clients feel supported as they navigate personal growth and healing. We also have Dr. Heather Burton, who is a nationally recognized scholar, leader, and advocate for racial and gender equity. She has served as Associate Vice President and Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity at Case Western Reserve University, where she has been instrumental in driving systemic change. Dr. Burton teaches in Africana Studies, Theater, and Social Work, focusing on race, racism, and social policy. She is also a published author, conference creator, and sought-after speaker, featured across universities, organizations, and media platforms. Her many honors include the Feminist Mentor Award, YWCA Women of Achievement, and the National Women's Studies Association Mentor Award. Through her initiatives, such as the Protect Your Crown Conference and Crimson Heights Ministries, Dr. Burton empowers Black women and fosters community transformation. We are continuing with our deep dive into the African American mother-daughter dynamic, this time exploring how our history plays into our lived experiences. From slavery and Jim Crow to the present-day struggles and triumphs of Black families, we'll uncover how generational trauma, resilience, and social pressures continue to influence the way mothers raise their daughters. Together, we'll unpack the weight of history on our relationships, the meaning behind the strong Black woman identity, and how we can move toward open communication and generational healing. This is an episode you will definitely want to join us for. Thank you for joining. The conversation I wanted to have today about the African American mother-daughter dynamic is, how does our history play into our experience? What I'm believing is that, and we touched upon it a little bit when we talked about our views and responses to the initial episodes from the conversation, but our mothers, and us even, those of us that are mothers, we have some historical something happening in our lives that causes us to choose to mother in the way that we do and in the way that our mothers have chosen to raise us. Do you have any thoughts on any historical experiences that may have shaped that mother-daughter dynamic? Ways that maybe they were raised with the effort to protect their daughters?
Well, I think it goes back, for me, it goes back to their saying, that saying, mothers raise their daughters and they love their sons. So
Mm-hmm.
to protect them, or teaching them in order to protect them against the world that is hostile and that is not nice. So giving them the survival skills. We
Mm-hmm.
were always looked at as the inferior ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you talk about the Black woman, like, not my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to teach them, to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, it's really survival. So those
Mm-hmm.
very innate survival skills to make it, to navigate through this world
Mm-hmm.
unscathed as much as possible.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything that Sherry's saying, and I think when we think about history, and it's so important to go back to history and the impact that history has on us. Dr. Joy um, DeGruy, I think that's how you say last name. It might have been Leary at one point when I remember when she was doing the actual initial. But anyway, she has a book called Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and
Mm,
it deals in understanding how slavery impacted us as a community. And so it really talks about, even examples of child rearing and whipping as an example, is that biblically you have spoil a child, spare the child, wait, spare the rod, spoil the child.
mhm,
And she talks about this example when we think about slavery and the whip, and that
mhm,
a lot of traditions that we have picked up within our community are based on historical traditions of slavery. And
mhm,
so that, if we look at that dynamic of slavery, if we look at segregation, if we look at aspects of Jim Crow, but specifically when we look at slavery and the impact that it had on the family, in particular, you think about a mother-daughter dynamic, and you think
mhm,
about slavery. First, let's look at the Black woman's body and the
mhm,
abuse of the Black woman's body during slavery. Is that was ownership, not only just the Black woman, but the Black male. When we're talking about slavery, was ownership. And so in that ownership, the woman's body became that of a slave master. And when
mhm,
that body became that of the slave master, a a Black woman, African woman, let's say African woman, had no authority over their body. And
mhm,
so they're not only stripped of identity, but they're also stripped of anything that identifies them as a woman. And so
mhm,
anything that they would have brought with them in terms of child rearing, in terms of childbearing, things that they had to do in secret. So
mhm,
a Black woman's nurturing became less about her own children and more about the master's children.
mhm,
That's one dynamic that we're looking at. We think about when it talks about nurturing. And so slavery impacted that dynamic, that family dynamic. And I don't want to minimize it to just the mother daughter relationship, but the family in general. But with the mother daughter relationship, think about what a slave woman taught her daughter. And
right.
remember, and I said this in a previous episode, is that when we're talking about blessings and curses, we're talking about 4 generations for it to shift. And
Mhm,
so if you think about slavery and you think about our generation and you think about our parental generation, is that we aren't 4 generations removed from slavery, or we're just
mhm,
not 4 generations removed from slavery. We are just the first generation born after the Civil Rights Act. And
mhm,
so if you put all of this into perspective of the things that have trickled down to impact the mother-daughter dynamic,
mhm,
then we think about how history has impacted everything and who we are. And I know many people always want to say slavery was so long ago, but because of the generational curses that came from slavery and the generational abuses that came from slavery, it impacts us in our familial dynamics. And so, yeah,
right.
that's what I would say. How when we think about it, is and I was saying this, if you think about a mother during slavery, what they're teaching their daughter
Mhm,
is they can't even protect their daughter from the
right.
abuse. And
Yeah.
what mother does not want to protect their daughter from the abuse? So what do? They teach them how to be independent. They teach them how to be strong. Same things that we talked about before that generationally impact how a mother raises her daughter.
And that's
Absolutely.
funny that well, not funny that you say that, but I'd never really thought about it like that until you just said that. While they're
Mm-hmm.
Mhm,
nurturing the master's kids and doing all of that stuff, they like, we ain't got time to do that over here.
I don't have time to do this over here,
Right.
right.
but I need
Teach
to
you how to
protect you how
be
not to be
independent.
beat.
Exactly.
Right.
Let me teach you some survival skills because
Yeah.
that's needed right now.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Never
that
thought
was
about
a
it like
lot
that
right
until
there.
she just said that.
Let
Yeah,
me
I put on my Black Studies professor hat that
I
time.
like that. Let me just say it again slower for in case anybody missed it. The nurturing that we could have had was transferred due to slavery to the master's children. The nurturing that African slave moms could have given their daughters and children was transferred to the master's children
Mhm.
and replaced with because I am not in a position to fully protect you, what I can do is give you independence, make you
And
independent,
teach you survival skills.
make you
Make you
survive.
strong.
That is heavy.
Mhm.
That's real heavy. And then it's not just slavery, because even though quote unquote slavery ended, then we shifted, as you said, right into Jim Crow. And I
Mhm.
think about how my mom would would talk about her mother, and how her mother would discourage her about going certain places and doing certain things and acting a certain way, because her experience was, you know, very different. It was, I need to protect you by telling you where not to go, how to act, so that you are acceptable. You're received well by the white people, and you're not hurt and nothing happens to you. And so it's just transferred, just, in a different lens from one generation to the next, out of slavery into Jim Crow.
And you think about that when we're talking about generations, is that that's what we've learned. And so the generational things or generational aspects, ideologies, they go from one generation to the next. And so
Mhm.
it may not manifest in the way that we saw it in slavery, but it
Mhm.
manifests that it's still some of those same ideologies that impact us today that were put into place because of survival.
It just may
Um,
look different.
and then I was going to say really quickly, it thinking about when you talk about Jim Crow is one of the other ideas, and this happens to our girls today, is this whole concept of adultification. Is that during slavery, black girls were African girls, I have to say that, were considered adults.
Right.
And so we forget that we don't allow them to be children. And many people
Mhm.
still have that mindset today, is that at 12 and 13, we're not allowing black girls to be children. And we're putting the expectations of adulthood on them at 12 and 13. And so what does a mom do? Is a mom historically tries to protect them from that adultification lens. And so this is why I'm telling you to dress a certain way. This is why I'm telling you you can't go here. This is why I'm telling you you can't walk this way. And so those are all aspects that come into play when we're talking about specifically that mother-daughter dynamic.
Mhm. And I've heard, and I hope I get this right, that so much of this is so deeply entrenched, because it is literally being passed on through our genetics, things that we really can't explain why we act and behave and respond to certain stimuli and triggers the way we do, because our DNA has changed because of all of these historical circumstances through the years.
Now, I can't say yay or nay to that. I would need somebody from biology to actually counter that.
Yeah.
Do I believe I mean, or agree or counter? Do I believe that that's a possibility? Of course.
Hmm.
Because when we think about what trauma does, is that if we think about the stressors that occur with trauma,
Hmm.
and Cherie, you can jump in here as well, is that trauma impacts us through stress. Stress
Hmm.
impacts our DNA. Stress impacts I should say our makeup, our bodily makeup. And so if you're thinking about a woman that's pregnant and that stress being passed down, that stress
Yeah.
is manifesting through the womb, that stress is manifesting through the child. So I would say I agree with that, is that though some things we don't even understand why we do, other things we get caught in because it is tradition
Mhm.
and it's
Right.
learned tradition, and we think that it's okay because that's all that we know.
Yes.
And if we
Yeah.
haven't learned or seen another lens, then in all that we know, that's what we do.
So that kind of speaks to the generational trauma and resilience continuing to influence how we parent, how we place expectations on each other. Um, does that also speak to this idea of being a strong Black woman and
It
what that
absolutely
means.
does. When I think about it, it's, you know, the mothers teaching us to be strong, to be resilient. The unfortunate part of that, while it's good, it also limits emotional vulnerability,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
having to carry that, suffer in silence, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's the downside of that. So yeah, it impacts us in that way.
Yeah. And I think about that with the strong Black woman in that the whole tropes that have been developed to define Black women, and that impact, but not only the impact internally within the community and the dynamic between a mother and daughter, but also the impact that it has on external. And
Mm-hmm.
so the biases, the microaggressions, the preconceived notions that are created based on those stereotypes of someone being the strong Black woman. Oh, they can handle that. Oh, give it to her. She can do it. And it
Mm-hmm.
comes externally and internally within the community. And so if you think about that from generations, what that's done, that's why I love that book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome,
Ah,
because
pick that up.
yeah, it really digs into understanding how slavery has impacted the community and creating PTSD for us. So
Yeah.
when we think about a lot of things that happen to us and a lot of things that we deal with, we have to attach it to the historical aspect of what is shaped. I mean, and I think about, even when you think about the mother-daughter dynamic and you think about systemic racism,
Mm-hmm.
and for example, before, I'm not gonna say that, I'm not gonna say it, I'm not gonna go there, but that at one point racism was declared a public health crisis
Mm-hmm.
in Cleveland, in the county, and in other cities and counties. I mean, and so if racism is declared a public crisis, a health crisis, a public health crisis, what do we think that impact has on Black women, and specifically Black women who are mothers and raising daughters?
Mm-hmm.
Because think about this, is that here's a mother in the work environment, because now we go back to the Black woman working,
Mm-hmm.
because the family dynamic for several reasons has been destroyed. Um, and it has been countered, and people always want to say, we got to rebuild the family, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. But when you've got so many systems in place destroying the Black family, how do we rebuild? And so if you have all of these systems that are destroying, and you put all this burden on a Black woman,
Mm-hmm.
that Black woman is now bringing this home,
Yes.
and she's raising these children.
Mm-hmm.
And so we expect her to be Superwoman, but we're not giving Superwoman no mental health. We're
Exactly.
not giving Superwoman no break.
It's pouring into her cup.
Yes,
Yes.
that's absolutely true.
Mhm.
And I love how you put that in perspective. I mean, I, you know, I was a single mom for a while, and I joke about it, but there's some real seriousness behind it. I remember um after I got divorced, my kids were 2 and 4, and I had actually got divorced here in Georgia and relocated back to my hometown of Cleveland. And the kids were 2 and 4. And I just remember I had to be all things to these two children who did not understand what was happening. I had to be the provider. I had to be the nurturer. I had to be there was no Uber then, but the Uber driver. I had to show up at school. I still had to be an excellent employee because I had to provide for us. I had to grocery shop and cook and all these things. And I used to, as they got older and, I'm trying to organize our life, I used to have what I call team meetings. And I remember my kids being like 7 and 9. And I'm saying, on this day, you're going to wash. And on this day, you're going to wash. And on this day, this is my wash. And here's a bunch of food in the refrigerator that you can cook for yourself, because I got to go and go work, and I'm going to be home late. And it's just, and I remember after, it was hard. It was hard. I would like to say I handled it well. I don't know. I have to ask my kids. They might do their own podcast about me, but um, I would like to say I handled it well. But I do realize when I was removed from that and they were older, I look back and I regretted that I rushed their childhood. That I, because in my mind, whether I verbalized it or not, and I don't think I verbalized it, and if I did, I was talking in my sleep. I was just like, I just need them to be bigger. I need them to be more independent. I need them to get older. So my life could be easier. And what I'm hearing is that's such a huge, it feels like a gap because Black moms have always had to work for the most part. Like there's very few stories that I'm acquainted with where our family unit is dad goes to work, mom stays home. I'm sure they exist, but I don't think it's as common as the fact that moms go out and work because that's what we've done. So there is going to be a lack in certain areas because of that, just strictly due to that.
Yeah. And I think you said something, Kim, as you were talking about, raising your kids and coming home as a single mother. Here's another idea of no one gives you the benefit of the doubt of being tired. And so if you think about, say, for example, you come home, or no, let's take it back. You snap at work the next day because you're just exhausted. No one's going to give you that benefit, but what they're going to do is label you as the angry Black woman, or they're going to label you as an angry Black woman because of the passion that you have about at the school that you need to take care of your kids. And Brittany Cooper in her book, Eloquent Rage, says that we have a right to be angry as Black women because of all that we carry. And I think if we brought that to the table as Black women, that would also help us to release a lot of these preconceived notions that people place on us and that can impact our family dynamics and what we're doing within the situation between a mother and a daughter.
It's all a domino effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really is.
And we often don't think about that. I just said to someone the other day, I said, it doesn't hurt to be nice because you don't know what people are going through. And then we were having a conversation and it continued. And I said, one of the things that I have learned is to stop putting my preconceived notions on folks based on the way they behave on a first encounter or something that I deal with.
Making the assumption.
Making the assumption. Yeah. Because often we do that. And we have to really, really be careful.
When we think about when I just talked about the emotional silence, not the vulnerability piece, oftentimes because women suffer in silence, like you say, you don't know what's going on with them.
Right.
Yep.
And that goes right back to an earlier conversation we had about the open communication. I know I've heard it said in my own family, you keep certain things in the family. There's certain things you just don't talk about. How does that affect how we would relate to our mothers and our daughters when certain things just can't be said?
You just continuing the cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know earlier we talked about trying to break that cycle and some steps to open communication, but what else could we be intentional about?
So one of the things that I always that I think about very often, and I'm an avid reader. I love to read. And I wasn't like that way. I was joking with my sorors, my sayings, that the other weekend we were talking about reading, and they were talking about all these books that they read as kids. And I was like, I don't know, I didn't read those because I didn't read as a kid. It wasn't until I got older. But in that, I say that because I think that's one of the things that can help us within our community and the relationship between mothers and daughters is reading and understanding the impact that history has had on us, understanding the impact that trauma has on us. Because you may not be in a place to have the conversation, but you can pick up a book, you can listen to a podcast, you can listen to something, you can listen to a podcast, you can listen to us. But you can
where is it coming from?
Right.
Yeah.
That's where self-reflection that you spoke of earlier, you got to be self-reflective.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
I
then
think that's the, I was going to say, and I go back to earlier though, is, and I think this is probably the challenge. How
mm-hmm.
do you recognize that there is a problem?
Right.
Because if this is learned behavior and impacted from generation and the generation before, how do you recognize, and when do you recognize that there is a problem? I don't
Right.
have that. I don't have that answer.
Especially when Black women wear the strength of a Black woman as a badge.
Yeah.
So how can you both be a strong Black woman and then be vulnerable enough to open up and admit that something's not right, not good, and ask for help?
Well,
And s-
again, I think when we're talking specifically about the mother-daughter, again,
Mhm.
the reflective piece, you got to know it doesn't feel good
Yeah.
to,
Right.
we were taught, our mothers and maybe our grandmothers were taught we can't afford to be vulnerable. So we held that stuff in.
Mhm.
We couldn't show the pain because if we did, then that's going to be held against us.
Mhm.
So
But we
let me
give
ask
it
this
to people.
question then. What does good look like?
What
Because that's so
it,
relative.
it exactly to the
It is. And it is. It's individual. It's
Mhm.
individual of how you define good.
right.
Because someone can live in dysfunction and think it's good.
Yep.
Right. Because you
Or
don't
that
know what you
they can.
don't know.
And I often believe that people who are living, let me see, in that way, oftentimes they know it's not good, but that's where their comfort zone is. But
Yeah.
Mm,
anything else that's uncomfortable because you don't know what's on the other side of that. But
mhm.
people, as long as you're comfortable with it, you're comfortable with it. I was like I shared about my mom, love my mom to death, but I was at a place where I didn't feel like our relationship had reached its full potential, had
Right.
changed. I do believe that it got stuck in a shift and
Mhm.
hadn't propelled forward. And it didn't feel good to me to feel like that about my mom. And so I
Right.
owed it not only to her, but to myself to have that conversation. And it was only the perception, it was only the fear that prevented that conversation from happening sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So forgive me if I'm jumping around. I have so many thoughts at once.
Told you I
What
can feel
tensions?
wheels turning.
I know.
Right.
What tensions arise when mothers try to prepare their daughters for racism and sexism while also wanting to nurture them?
Mm. So I'm pausing because one of the reasons that I'm pausing is because I'm thinking of those two words, racism and sexism.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking generationally is that we're the generation that has put a label on what it is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so historically, our parents didn't know it was racism, genderism, sexism. They didn't know the terminology. They were in their mind, they were protecting us just from harm. And
Yes.
so that harm came in um, a white man towards us.
Mm-hmm.
The harm came from any man that was going to abuse, any person that was going to abuse. And so that was, I think that was the lens of where they were trying to protect us from. It isn't till later years where they knew race. Race was always,
Mm-hmm.
and anybody will, I mean, any Black person will tell you that race takes the forefront of fighting for the other isms because race is just it's the prominent of what we always had to fight for, and so it usually takes precedent over our other isms. And so I think generationally, when we're talking about the mother daughter in that conflict, or that how they dealt with trying to protect us from that, is that the big thing was, how do they protect us from racism,
Right.
and how do they make sure, and it's interesting, that's an interesting question. Yeah, but I say it's an interesting question because it takes me to another direction too, is
Mm-hmm.
that as much as parents generationally, and I think about our generation and what has happened, is that as much as moms is trying to protect daughters from racism, we also move daughters to sons and daughters, but we move our children to suburban districts.
Yes.
And so now we moved them to suburban districts, and we have succumbed them to more racism.
Mm-hmm.
It comes in the form of microaggressions and bias. So it's not the all out covert racism, but it's the indirect, and it's not the overt racism, it's the covert. And so now they're fighting this in a different direction. So
Mhm.
that was, I know that was a sidebar, but it just made me think of generationally what has happened based on the systems, or based on what's happening societal and politically
Mhm.
that's surrounding us, of what we're trying to do to protect our children.
Mhm. Mhm. So how do these narratives about race influence the way mothers pass down lessons of identity and beauty and worth to their daughters?
But I'm gonna share a
Amazing.
funny story, and I don't know that I've ever told anybody. I don't know that I ever told anybody this. So I'm trying to think of the movie with Crazy Joe. What was the movie? Was it Morgan
Oh,
Freeman?
I know
He went to
exactly
the
what you're talking
school.
about, but I can't think
He
of.
just went to the school to clean up the school
Yes.
because nobody could do it.
Uh-huh.
It's a very popular movie, and I don't know why. So it's on the tip of my tongue, and I can't say it. They used to call me Joe, but now they call me back.
Oh, lean on me, lean on me.
Lean on me. Yes.
Oh, do you remember in there when there was the big brawl in the school, and they pushed the fair skinned young lady out of the bathroom, and the other girls, who were of darker complexion, ripped her shirt off and things like that. When my daughter was born, and she was very, very fair skinned, that movie came to mind. And so I think in my way to protect her, as silly as it may sound, I felt like I couldn't really even speak to my daughter's beauty. I think my daughter is absolutely gorgeous. Very,
Mhm.
very light eyes. They change blue, gray. And I couldn't speak to that because in my mind, I don't want her to then feel like she's better than, and then she has all of this backlash because
Oh,
I thought,
yeah.
that to me, kind of speaks to this a little bit. Like, here I am, I'm trying to protect her, but I'm protecting her in a way that's not necessarily, helping her understand who she are and being confident in her own identity and who she was, just because I'm like I got this light, bright baby with blue eyes, gray eyes, and people are going to be against her because of that. So I'm thinking of the color is that even though I'm lighter skinned, but she was light,
Mhm.
bright. She was
And see, that was the other thing as we were talking about racism, the colorism within our own community.
Mhm.
Because I think on the other side of that, Sherry, like where, you know, trying to instill and not infirm, affirm the beauty of brown skin and darker skin young ladies to feel comfortable in their skin and accept it. Because, even within our community, we say, bright is better, light skin is better, or that has been it in the past. I think things are starting to change now, but trying to make sure that our daughters do feel beautiful in a world that tells us we're so starkly different, that there is no beauty in us, by looking at every
They
TV
come
show,
in many shades.
magazine, everything, social media now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and so again, this goes back to slavery and the impact that slavery had on us in determining
Without
who was right, yep, who was good, who was not, and that whole mulatto biracial child of being considered better because they were closer to white. And so we still carry a lot of those things within our families. And I think Sherry meant, she was talking with her daughter, and the experience that she had with her daughter and not wanting to emphasize looks. My mom did the same thing to me. My mom is brown skinned, and on a good day, I may have a little bit a shade or two of color. And so my mom was very cognizant in how she talked about lightness, darkness, But a funny story that I don't really tell family knows this is that I always thought I was brown, Cherie. So couldn't nobody tell me I wasn't brown because my mother and brother are brown. My dad is light, but couldn't nobody tell me I wasn't brown. So that's how I saw myself. And it wasn't until I got older and, you hear the comparison, or I stand with my dad and my dad is like, but again, think about that. So think about that impact if you have a mother and daughter and you have colorism within their dynamic or their relationship, and how that may impact if the mother has not had a healthy experience with whatever color, whether she's light or whether she's dark, it can impact the relationship with her daughter if she's light or dark.
And I
but
think maybe that's where I, kind of felt the need to protect her and like, okay,
Mhm.
pick you end all be all, because we come in all shades. And what got me was she was probably about maybe 4, and she was watching, I don't know if you remember, cute little girl, black girl, macaroni
Mhm.
and cheese commercial, Kraft macaroni and cheese. And
Mm-hmm.
she said something about that black girl. And I said, black girl? I said, Deja, you're black too. And she was like, I'm white. I was like, oh, we got the lessons to teach, because I ain't got my child going around thinking she white. So yes, that was, that was eye-opening too. Like, no, we come in all shades and sizes. She's like, I thought I was white. You
Yeah.
need a long time.
And I was thinking, as you talk about that Kraft commercial, is thinking generationally. And so we think about our parents' generation, they didn't have media images that looked like us.
Yeah.
We got a little bit more, but the generation now has even more. And I remember I did a presentation at the University of Akron for one of the student groups, and they wanted me to talk about beauty and inner beauty and how it affects us with our personality. And I Googled beauty, and all of these white women popped up with Beyonce and Rihanna sprinkled. Then I Googled black beauty, and y'all know what popped up?
Oh my God.
What? Halle Berry.
The horse.
What?
Stop it. Of
The
course.
horse. The horse black beauty is
Wow.
what actually came up on Google. And so if you think about that and the images that they see, that's another impact of how history has played into what we think is beautiful. And so now you have mothers who are trying to counter what somebody tells them is not beautiful, and they're trying to raise their child to say that they're beautiful. And so, we've got that's the one thing about us as Black folks. We got a whole lot that we are dealing with, wrestling with, and navigating through because of history.
Yes, absolutely. And so it would behoove us to really, as you mentioned before, start to read, start to research and see. I'm going to take your book suggestions and put them in the show notes for those who are willing to uh, go in and learn a little bit and find out and follow up on this. But those things could really, if the more you know about your history, the better you can build your future. You can't change the things that have already happened, but you can certainly pave a path forward from past lessons. So
Yeah.
we have got to, we used to have in our culture um, the tradition of intergenerational storytelling.
Yeah.
Used to be huge. And now we're here today talking about how we're keeping things in the family and not being able to openly communicate and being transparent with each other. How did we lose that? And how do we get that back?
Yeah. It's so shameless plug, but I've been doing intergenerational work.
Uh-huh.
And one of the reasons is because of that lost narrative, because of the lost oral traditions that we had historically within our community to share. And so for the National Missionary Baptist Convention of America, I actually created this women's ministry model that is shaped in intergenerational work. So it's shaped in how do we bring because this has happened before, this happens within the church as well. But how do we bring women together of all ages so that these stories can be told, and these, you can get the experiences from one generation to the next generation, and not excluded? Because we know historically, like griots told the story, they told about the history. And so we knew, and we didn't have to sit and wonder because somebody was telling us the story. And in my new book that's coming out in 26, I talk about what it means to have intergenerational voices, specifically for women and women's ministry, because it's imperative that we give back to these storytellings. And think about this, Kim, because you talk about that with that intergenerational is, we used to sit around the dinner table and it would be generations.
Yeah. Yes.
And so you had grandma, you had great grandma, you had grandma, you had mother, you had daughter. Here's the other take on that. What has become, and the age difference may not have been because they may have had them at 19, 20, and no one said anything. But we've put a negative spin on having children, or anyone getting married at 19 or 20 and having children, whatever your view is, whether they having them with the husband in the house or without a husband. But we put a negative spin on that age. And we made it, you're not mature enough to have a child.
When back then it was different.
And we say, but back then it was different. But guess what we've also lost? Now we've lost generations being able to be in the same family and household, because we're pushing everybody to be older in order to procreate. And when you get older and procreating, you lose years. And so now grandparents are now 80 versus grandparents being 70. And so we don't think about a lot of the things that we pick up and the dynamics that we have done that has reshaped who we are as a community.
But a lot of that is also due to the fact that, these same moms are trying to ensure a future for their daughters that includes a bit of independence and ensuring that they are self-sufficient prior to bringing in another life. And yes, I agree with Cherie. Things were different. Like, how much choice? Things are quite different. So first of all, let's go back to slavery, and please feel free to correct me. Slavery, there was no choice. You did what you had to do when you could do it, and you dealt with it. Now, fast forward a little bit. I also have heard stories, and one of the several of the guests that I talked about a time where I'm trying to think about what time frame this was. I want to say somewhere between the 40s, 50s, 60s. A woman who was unmarried, especially a young woman who got pregnant, was pretty much removed from the community so that she could go have her baby and then come back to the community. So now we're talking about, first, there was no opportunity to really have agency over your body. Now that we think we have some agency over our body, and we end up getting pregnant out of wedlock or younger than whatever the plan was. Now that's the reason why we find ourselves saying, wait to have children, be self-sufficient. It's like this accordion effect.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. All I'm saying is that we give and take. And so we've had to give up what it means to have multiple generations in the house based on what it means to make sure that we're self-sufficient, what it means to make sure that we're in a certain place to raise children. And that's the only, it's the sacrifices for the betterment.
Right.
So, and one thing that we have is that when we look, the later you have a child, the less generations you're going to have that child is going to be exposed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not, and I'm going to make sure that I say this. It's not a right or wrong.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. There's no right or wrong. It's just that we lose that generational oral tradition. And so we have to figure out, how do we bring that back when we have lost, when we have lost that ability to be at the dining table or sit. We're also one of the few communities unlike other communities who, as soon as we turn 18, we move out
Mm-hmm. Or we're put out.
or we put out. And so compared to other communities who build wealth based
Mm-hmm.
on coming together and being in the same house.
You know what
Well,
was I just went to just I'm sorry, had a
Go ahead.
point. Interesting fact, I had just not too long ago went to Jamaica and somebody was kind of giving a history lesson. And if you look at some of the houses, there's one house, and then there's another house built right behind it, but kind of up, and then there's another house. They said those are generational
They're
houses.
generation houses. Yep.
I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, isn't that something?
But
Yep.
to this,
I've gotten away from.
yeah. But
Yeah.
to this intergenerational dialogue, I'm kind of stuck on this because what I'm sitting here thinking about is if we could reintroduce it, how do we get young folks to listen? Are they even in a position to want to listen, to receive? How do we get them to actually listen? Because and maybe it's just me, but
I think
maybe
we have to be willing to listen too, though.
I
Yeah.
If by creating that safe space, oftentimes as an adult, we have the mentality that we know everything, but this generation now is so much different than how we may have grown up. So it's about listening. When I used to work in the school, I was very much so into let me hear what you have going on and let me hear how you got to the thought process that you got to about the thing that you did.
right, right.
And so being able to kind of connect to that, put a different, spin on it, adult, in order for them to listen. And I had kids who were really receptive to listening to me for
Mhm,
that very reason, because I wasn't there to judge, or I wasn't there to then give them the motherly, well, you shouldn't have been doing this, or you shouldn't have been. But let's talk
mhm.
about what your alternatives were.
Right, right.
So we have to create the safe space for the young people to want to listen to us. We can't be so
Right.
high up, in our, age and with our credentials that we forget to connect with the next generation that we need to pull along.
That's a good
And
point.
we have to be intentional.
Absolutely.
There has to be intentionality when we're talking about bringing generations together, is because it may not be the girl next door, but it may be the girl 2 doors down that really wants to hear and hear
Mhm,
the story. And so in that intentionality is, how do we have that conversation with the girl 2 doors down from where we live?
mhm,
And what I'm gonna say is, so 2 doors down from where we live is that, and what I'm thinking about is how often, and this is what I mean by intent, how often, as Cherie said this, how often we're tired and we don't want to listen.
right. That's true.
And so if she's knocking on the door, and this is just an example, because many of it doesn't matter what spaces we're in, I can guarantee that most of us as Black women, at some point, someplace, there has been a young person that has come to us that has been willing to sit and listen, and we've either handled it where we've talked and sat
Mm,
with them and chatted, or we blew them off because we didn't think they really were serious about what we had to say.
right, right.
And so that type of intentionality. And then there are other efforts, like, for example, the work that I do is really bringing people together. And I'll give you a great example. I was just in Mississippi doing a workshop on Sunday around this particular model of intergenerational work. Well, the majority of the audience was 18 and over, and I'll
Mhm,
say 25 and older, except there were 4 teenagers in the room. I could have easily just let those 4 teenagers go by the way and not did anything with them. But I was intentional when I saw them of figuring out, how am I going to include them in this work right now and use them as part of this programming. And
mhm,
so I found things for them to do that particular evening so that they can share in the experience.
mhm.
And so that, because oftentimes we can be in spaces and we forget about the kids that are sitting there because we're focused
Right.
on adults.
Got to read the room.
Yep.
Mhm, That's
And
true.
and then here's the other thing, is not limited. I know we're talking about the mother-daughter dynamic, but remember, even in talking about the mother-daughter dynamic, it's mothering comes in so many perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be the aunt, it may be the cousin, but when
Mm-hmm.
we have the opportunity and dinner spaces, is be intentional.
Right.
Have play games. Play games that brings in a historical component. It may be that as a family, you all have written down certain questions where you write these questions down, and the members of the family have to identify what the answer is. And it may be a history question of who's Kim's grandmother
Mm-hmm.
and what's her full name.
Yeah.
And just that simple can engage the dialogue and the conversation. And then it makes someone say, oh, wait, she did what? And I'll give a great example is, now I know I'm a little different because I know I like history. So I know I'm always asking questions, but I remember my great uncle is I was very intentional, especially as he got older, to sit at his feet and listen to the stories. I
Mm-hmm.
never knew we had a family-owned restaurant on Cedar
Mm-hmm.
until I was probably in my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And so little things like that, that had I been listening as a child, I probably would have learned that information.
Right.
But if you do it in a family game, it opens the door for those type of conversations.
Yeah, that's an excellent um suggestion, because I was going to ask, how do we create these intergenerational conversations and dialogue?
Yeah.
Um,
Another example is you start with a word
yeah.
and say, for example, you're just in a room and you've
Mm-hmm.
got different generations in the room of your family. Because at every holiday cookout, we have the opportunity to have these conversations and this
Mm-hmm.
dialogue.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is throw a word out like black
Mm-hmm.
and be like, okay, tell me what comes to mind when you hear the word black.
Right.
And then you start building on that story. That's another technique with narrative building. You build on that story and start hearing, oh, wait, why did she say that? Why did he
Mm-hmm.
say that? And then the questions start to flow from there.
I like that. And I don't know, that would be excellent at a cookout.
Yeah.
We don't do that at cookouts. We just eat and laugh and drink.
Yeah,
And
see, my family my family has me, so I probably get on their nerves, because but you know what? Now I will say this in all transparency, in 2021, my
Mhm.
therapist told me I couldn't talk about Black people after 5 o'clock on Friday because of the work that I did. And, just what I do is that
Mhm.
everyone wanted to talk about something about Black people, something about diversity, equity, and inclusion, something along those lines, but it was draining me. And so in
Yeah.
my family, we have those conversations, but I'm also that person that's intentional to say, hey, let's talk. And now the family has gotten in the habit that even my nieces and nephews will call me
Mhm.
to have conversations about history, about things that generational, about family. I mean, somebody
Mhm.
called me the other day and said, who's the youngest cousin? Who's my mom's youngest cousin?
Mhm.
And so we have that, but we've been blessed as a family too, because we have, especially on my mom's side, we have two historians.
Oh, wow.
And so they've done a lot of the research as it relates to our family.
Mhm.
So yeah.
that's awesome.
I like that. I remember, I don't know if it's a joke or a story or a combination of the two, but I want to share because it seems appropriate. So I remember a husband was watching his wife cook a roast, and she would always cut the ends of the roast off and then put them in the oven. And so he watched this a few times, and he asked her, he said, "Why do you always cut the ends of the roast off?" He said, she said, "I don't know. I did like this because that's what my mom did." And he's like, "You should ask her." He's like, "I will." She's like, "I will. I'm gonna ask her." So she calls her mom, and she's like, "Mom, this is how I cook a roast. You always cut the ends of the roast off. Why did you do that? And the mom goes, I don't know. I did it because my mom did it. That's how she made roast. And so that's just what I learned. So luckily for them, the great grandma was still alive. And they happened to go and ask her, why do you cut the ends of the roast off when you cook your roast? And she said, oh, it's nothing special to it. It's the pan that I had. I couldn't fit a whole roast in it. So I had to cut the ends off in order to make it fit in the pan so that we could cook it. And the only reason that I bring that story up is because it is so critical that we share these stories and that we have conversations intergenerationally so that we don't look up 3 generations down the line cutting up a perfectly good roast just because that's something that was done and there's no definition or explanation to the reason for it.
Right. Yep.
That's all I wanted to introduce
We have to
there.
get beyond the unspoken stuff.
Yeah.
We get a
Lots
lot
of
of that.
unspoken stuff within our, family dynamics, mother-daughter dynamics. There's so many unspoken things. I think when the conversation happens, we have to move away from that because again, it might be rooted just in our perception.
Mm-hmm. But
Something
then again, you get into the respectability politics, right? Right. Where certain times in our history with Black moms and daughters, we weren't given the opportunity to ask questions. That's it's different now. These young folks are not deterred at all. They want to know, they will ask questions, they have a voice, and I love it. But there was a time when
you asked, and it was
adults
because
did not open
Yeah.
themselves up to questions.
I
Yep.
told you, that's why, because I told you.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I said. And I remember being younger and at a Christmas Eve dinner. We always had Christmas Eve at my great aunt's house.
Mhm.
And I think I was talking or something, and my aunt told my mom, she talks too much. Said, she asked too many questions. And my mom was like, it's okay. But my
Mhm.
mom respected my aunt enough that she used to be like, before we get there, after that particular incident, she was like, what you're gonna have to do is you can't ask the same questions like you do me. And I know that it's gonna kill you because that curiosity is gonna kill you. But she had a conversation about that because my aunt thought I was not in a child's place because of being inquisitive and asking the questions. But yeah, you're right.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Those are the historical things that we've just accepted
Yeah.
and carried on
Yeah.
and can't even say why.
Yeah. I think that roast analogy is a great one. Is that you're wasting perfectly good roast and
Yes,
you don't even understand why.
right, right. How do you think sororities and other community institutions historically shaped the mother-daughter dynamic in Black families, if at all?
Well, I think that's a loaded question.
I think it really is.
Yeah. I think that's a loaded
That's a separate entity.
Yeah. And what I say about that is that I look at and I don't want to generalize any sorority, but I look at the aspect of being college educated women. And so
Mhm.
you're going to get a certain dynamic of women who are college educated in terms of how they nurture their child or their daughter in the
Mhm.
mother-daughter dynamic. So that's one, that's one
That's very
impact
true.
is that when you're saying college educated women, and especially when we're looking at generationally
Mhm.
and what that meant to have a college education, it also meant a certain type of profession.
Mhm.
And so you're going to get a certain type of rearing. And that's why I said that's a kind of a loaded question, is that I don't know if I can generalize the impact of the actual sororities on the rearing of daughters more so than the type of women who are a part of the sororities and what that impact that impact on the mother-daughter relationship.
Okay, that's fair.
Very good point.
Yeah. Well, I might set it to the side for now, but It is such a loaded question. I might pull it back out at some point, and we might have to unpack that a little bit. What about other community
And
institutions?
I go back. I'll go
Uh-huh.
back really quickly because you said, oh, you're going to other institutions now, and you just mentioned
Yeah,
other
other
institutions.
community institutions
And
outside of sororities.
yeah, and the reason that I say that is I think about different institutions. So I think of, or different organizations. So you think about Jack and Jill, you think about the Boulay, you think about sororities, you think about the Links. These are your upper echelon Black organizations, and historically used to be more upper echelon than they are today. But
Right,
if you're thinking about the child rearing, that one thing that was not an issue was money.
right,
And so if money is not an issue in me rearing my children, that takes a certain dynamic out of the equation
mm-hmm.
compared to other people who may be more economically challenged and
Right,
who are not a part of those institutions. And so I think it really, when we're talking about that, we have to look at the individuals
right.
versus the organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree.
I feel like, and I don't disagree. I agree with you completely. I'm just trying to
What you
figure
trying to get at, Kim?
I'm trying to figure out, are there any other organizations? Because the ones you named are really good and you made great points, but I'm trying to challenge myself to think, are there any other organizations outside of those
Well,
that
you got to think when you talk about organizations are made up of individual people.
Yeah.
absolutely in community institutions, I'm thinking on the whole, like that may have had some kind of impact on shaping mother-daughter dynamics. I was just trying to see
And so I think it really is what, and again, and Cherie and I both said this, is that the organizations are made up of the individuals, but I think it depends. So if you're trying to kind of identify organizations that may influence a mother-daughter relationship, that would be determined upon the mission of that organization.
yeah.
And so maybe, for example, I don't know, I can't even think of a certain organization that has a certain mission. For example, a certain mission that focuses on the mother-daughter relationship is that you may get certain training. A great example that I'll use, and it's not for mothers, is like Fatherhood Initiative.
Right.
So if we talk about a nonprofit organization, it's teaching fathers how to be fathers. And so you're going to get a different type of person who's in that comes out of that, with the relationship between a father and a son, or a father and a daughter. That's the only thing I can think of from an organization perspective, that the organization's mission would impact the relationship of a mother-daughter.
Okay.
Right.
Versus the individuals.
Organization is geared towards, having healthy relationships, fathers having healthy relationships with their children specifically.
Okay.
And then what we can't do, and I say this in all honesty, is that when we think about specifically sororities or certain organizations within the Black community, and even, we talk about, I'm just thinking from a historical lens, if we talked about SELC or SNCC or something like that, is that those organizations are made up of people.
Right.
And those people, especially when you look at sororities, fraternities, those people are certain types of people. And so you're going to get not the same relationship, but you'll get similar
outcomes,
type of child rearing outcomes. It might operate differently and look differently, but that's why I said that's a loaded question.
All right. Well, put a pin in that one. I think you were going to we're going to revisit that when I build it out a little bit better.
Okay.
But I'm going to pivot slightly to my next question. What is the responsibility of, say, educators, mental health professionals, community leaders in helping mothers and daughters to navigate these historical influences today?
Repeat that for me one more time.
What responsibility do educators, mental health professionals, and community leaders have in helping mothers and daughters navigate these historical influences today?
Okay, I'll speak from the mental health perspective. When I've had, and I'm speaking directly for young girls that I work with, especially in the teen years, that's a transitional period for them, which often comes with conflict with their mothers. They're bumping heads. That's probably one of those shifts. And
Mm-hmm.
as a mental health professional, if I'm working with, let's say I'm working with a young lady, I also have to be willing to have maybe a difficult conversation with the mom, because mom
Mm-hmm.
may not realize that how you're navigating life is impacting your child. Your daughter.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
She's mimicking and doing what you did. You don't like what she's doing, but she's doing exactly what you're doing.
What you think?
And so sometimes I know sometimes people don't want to have conversations with, oh, I don't want to get this person upset. I don't want, you have it has to be a way that you can say it in a way that, and I call it using the backdoor approach,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
parent to receive what I'm saying. So I have to come in and maybe talk about some of the good stuff, but then also talk about, not sure if you're aware that this is kind of what's going on. And let's talk about how we can change that.
Right.
Overall goal is you want your daughter to be, emotionally well. You got to be emotionally well
Mm-hmm.
because she's doing what you're doing. If you're in a unhealthy relationship, she's going to be in a unhealthy relationship. You can't
Mhm.
tell her, don't do as I'm doing,
Mm-hmm. That's
because
true.
words mean nothing. Actions are everything.
Yeah.
And you can have the greatest intentions, but she's still going to follow you. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where, my responsibility lies as a professional. If I see it and I, have some insight, then I have to be able to have the difficult conversation, because sometimes parents can be reluctant, they can be defensive, and I totally understand that, because who
Right.
wants somebody coming in and the perception is you trying to teach me or tell me how to raise my daughter. That's
Yeah.
not what I'm trying to do.
Right.
Well, let's
Right.
talk about it. Let's have the conversation. I've never been one to shy away from having those difficult conversations, because, again,
Mm-hmm.
you have to allow yourself to be comfortable with being uncomfortable so that growth
Mm-hmm.
can happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll take another angle. Is it the responsibility of
Mm-hmm.
educators and community leaders to help mother and daughters navigate these historical influences?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I take that, and I took out mental health professional, because I know Cherie was looking at it from a lens of, and here's the thing, Cherie looked at a lens for when they come to her
Mm-hmm.
and when
Mm-hmm.
when she's servicing them. But
Mm-hmm.
is it her responsibility to go out and be like, I need to help all the community to
I don't
navigate
go out
mother and
looking.
daughters?
I don't go out looking for them. They got to come
Right.
to
Right.
me.
They got to come to you.
So that
And
is
that's where,
different.
yeah, and
So
that's
there's
why I
some personal
said,
accountability there. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so there's personal accountability there. And that's what I said with educators and community leaders is, where is the responsibility line? Is the responsibility line, this is my responsibility because I'm an educator to help a mother and daughter navigate their relationship because I see a daughter with issues in the classroom? No, that probably is not my responsibility. Now I can make referrals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that becomes, now, is it my responsibility as an educator or community leader to educate on historical aspects? Yes.
Yes.
And to
Mm-hmm.
understand the impact of history on every facet of life? Yes.
Mm-hmm. But again,
But you don't
I
have the
could
capacity
see,
to do that either. So,
yeah, I agree with you. But again, on that personal accountability, I think each one of us should have some notion of our history, some basic understanding to be able to share with our daughters on some level, and at least point them in the direction of getting more information when we've grabbed their attention and piqued their interest.
oh,
Every
yeah, definitely.
every mom, every Black family should be doing that. It should not just be, well, we're just living today and we're going to hope for the best. We need that historical context if we ever want to continue to move forward and move up.
And I think you
I,
said it earlier, Kim, you don't know what you don't know.
yep.
Yeah.
And I was about
But
to say,
people
I agree.
with okay, I don't know it. Okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
And
easier to live in that realm.
yeah. And the sad thing about it is most people think history is boring.
Yeah.
And so I'm only going to learn what you put in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
Most time you're not going to have people that are searching out to learn historical information and historical facts.
Mm-hmm.
Now the thing, well, the thing is we have museums. If folks don't destroy and take away the history of the museums, but those are the ways to get people interested in history. And um and see, we're right now, especially as educators, we're fighting systems that don't want us to teach in schools.
Right. And there's
And
a reason
so
for that and an agenda
yeah,
behind it.
there's
Absolutely.
definitely we know that there's a reason and agenda, but I will not give any of that right now airtime on your podcast.
Right.
I think just to speak to your point, Heather, that's why it's important for us to know the history. Because if
Yeah,
we know
Absolutely.
it, you can't strip us from something that we
you
didn't
can't
know.
strip it.
So
Right.
But that's why, and I another shameless plug. My other book that's due is talking about student success in historically Black spaces. That's one of the things that we talk about. And you're speaking of sororities and fraternities, specifically sororities and organizations, is teaching our children within those aspects. So some of the youth groups that we have is that when we talk about community leaders and educators, that's the way that we have to get the information to our young people. Is we've got to talk about it in every space that we occupy. So I'm not
Right.
going to put the burden just on sororities. I'm not going to put the burden just on the school system. I'm going to put the burden on every space that we occupy. We need to be teaching about something that has impacted or impacts us as a community when it relates to history and today.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this was fun. Um,
Yeah, those were a lot of loaded
I
questions.
I
know.
know you could tell she really thought about these questions.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did, but and I mean, I've got so many good nuggets out of this. Uh, Heather, let me ask you if you would please, if you can um repeat the names of the books that you mentioned and also maybe send those to me, put them in the chat so I can include them in the show notes because those are powerful recommendations. I've got to read them. I hope everyone listening will take the time to go and look at them and read them. I will also be putting your books in the show notes as well. So hopefully everybody can refer to those. This has been amazing. I hope to hear many comments and responses based off of this show. I want to hear what people are going to do about this. Like to me, this is a call to action. Um, get informed first about your family's history, and then branch out and broaden your horizons from there to include um, American history, African American history. We talked about slavery, Jim Crow. Find out for yourself, not just what they told you in school and what you heard from someplace. I get that they're trying to take a lot of this information out of the schools and keep institutions from teaching on it, but we're also in the information age. All of us walk around with pocket computers that can tell us anything that we ask it. We can Google search it, we could chat GPT it, we can search for information on all manner of topics. Take some time and dig into some historical, um, something historical that will feed your person, your relationship, that will give you a better sense of self and a better sense of who we are and where we come from. That can only help enhance the relationships in total, but specifically because we're talking about mother daughter dynamics, most certainly will be able to help enhance and improve that relationship. So, as before, any closing thoughts?
No, I think this has been a great conversation. And I can't say it enough, is that I tell my students this all the time. If you read one book, you can become an expert in that book.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's how I feel, is that if we read, we can become an expert in that book and in the lessons that's being taught. There are some other books when we talk about history and the impact. I'll put them in the chat, but like 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah Jones, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. Great historical books that put things in perspective when we're talking about race within America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to challenge my kids. I remember when they were in grade school, they used to always have summer reading. It was a requirement, and they've gotten away from that. But I would still make them read. I think even as young adults, they have to look every summer. I'm going to institute that.
That's a great challenge.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was last year, I challenged myself, and I do a lot of listening, but 50 books for the year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And not all of them were history books. A lot of them were, but not all of them were. Some were fiction.
Yeah, because you got to have balance.
Yeah.
The thing that I found, because I love reading also, and I love listening through Audible much more than, because I'm always trying to multitask everything. But thank you, ladies.
Of course. Thank you. This was good.
What a powerful and necessary conversation. I want to thank my guests, Cherie White and Dr. Heather Burton, for bringing their wisdom, insight, and authenticity to today's discussion. Together, we've unpacked how history, trauma, resilience, and love are all woven into the African-American mother-daughter dynamic, and how that shapes not just our families, but our communities. I hope you take away something meaningful from this episode, whether it's reflecting on your own story, opening up space for conversation with your loved ones, or simply recognizing that you are not alone in navigating these dynamics. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you follow Motherly Shift Podcast weekly on YouTube so you never miss a conversation. I'd also love for you to connect with me on all socials and share your thoughts, questions, and experiences. And if you'd like to reach out directly, you can always email me at motherlyshiftpodcast@gmail.com. Also, check out today's show notes for all of the referenced publications that were mentioned during the show, as well as the current events that Dr. Heather Burton is involved in. Stay tuned for our next episode, as we will begin a new 3-part series of discussions entitled Trauma, Triggers, and Therapy. Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Kemichele.